A man kneels in the dust of the ancient Near East, his hands stained with earth and sweat. He is not praying, he is setting a trap. Someone walking in the dark, stubbing their toe, scraping their knee, and temporarily losing their balance. They assume the text is talking about an honest mistake, the Skandalon, and decides the cost of this grace is simply too offensive to stomach. You feel it in your chest first. The heart rate spikes. The jaw clenches tight. A sudden, sharp heat rises in the back of your neck. Someone says the wrong thing. Someone ignores your contribution. Someone speaks a truth you are not ready to hear. This is the modern Skandalon. You are staring right at the bait stick. You think you are protecting your boundaries. You think you are standing up for your rights, but you are stepping onto the trigger. An offense is not a shield. It is a snare. We live in a culture that monetizes this exact trap. Every algorithm feeds it. Every news cycle sharpens the stick. Every comment section lays down fresh bait. We are encouraged to be outraged. We are taught to collect grievances, like currency. We build entire identities around the people we oppose. We carry the snare in our pockets. We stare at the cold glow of screens in a dark room. We swipe. We bite. We snap. And we wonder why our spirits feel crushed. We wonder why the air feels so thin in our lungs. We wonder why we cannot hear the voice of God. It is because you cannot walk freely while your foot is caught in a trap of your own making. The Skandalon does not just disguise itself as anger, a momentary lapse in judgment, a harmless obstacle that you just need to step around. But if you look closer at the Greek word hiding beneath the English ink, it disguises itself as justice. You want retribution. You want the person who hurt you to feel the exact weight of the pain they caused. You want the heavy stone to fall on them. But the mechanism does not work that way. The snare only crushes the one who steps on the trigger. When you harbor bitterness, you are not punishing the offender. You are swallowing the hook. Your unforgiveness is not a weapon against your enemy. It is a cage for your own soul. Grace is the only way out. But grace itself is scandalous. Grace asks you to uncurl your fists. Grace asks you to drop the heavy rocks you have been carrying. Grace demands that you look at the person whose very name leaves a bitter taste in your mouth and walk away from the trigger. Walking away is excruciating because forgiveness feels like losing. Forgiveness feels like letting them get away with it. Jesus knew the bait would look irresistible. He knew the Skandalon would always feel justified in the moment. He knew you would want to bite down. And he knew exactly what it looks like when an entire crowd encounters a hard teaching and decides to walk away. The stone walls of the synagogue in Capernaum echo with the murmurs of a restless, agitated crowd. They have just crossed the Sea of Galilee. At the actual mechanics of what Jesus is describing, you realize the loose rock is a myth. A stumbling block is not an accident. Looking for the man who multiplied the barley loaves and the dried fish. They can still remember the taste of the bread, the smell of the broken crust on the hillside the day before. They want another free meal. They want a political king who will keep their stomachs full, and the Roman occupiers at bay. Instead, Jesus offers them a metaphor that makes their stomachs turn. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. The crowd recoils. The imagery is grotesque. To a first-century Jewish audience, raised on strict Levitical dietary laws forbidding the consumption of blood, this is not just confusing. It is repulsive. The murmuring in the stone room grows louder, bouncing off the pillars. The disciples themselves start complaining, whispering among themselves that this teaching is simply too hard to digest. Jesus hears the whispering. He knows the tension in the room. He looks at his own followers, and he asks them a very specific question. In John chapter 6, verse 61, "Does this offend you?" In the original Greek, he is using the verb form of our word, skandalize humas. Does this act as a scandalon to you? Does this teaching trip the wire? Does my flesh and blood act as the bait stick that snaps your allegiance in half? Jesus knows exactly what he is doing. He is testing the hidden foundation of their loyalty. He is forcing them to It is an ambush. And this misunderstanding is not just a piece of linguistic trivia. It is a diagnosis. Decide whether they are following him because he provides what they naturally want, or because of who he actually is in all of his uncomfortable reality. The crowd wants a vending machine. Jesus offers them a sacrifice. The hard teaching is not a mistake in his communication strategy. It is a filter for their devotion, and the filter works exactly as intended. The text records that from this exact moment, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. You can hear the heavy sound of hundreds of leather sandals shuffling against the stone floor. You can watch them, turning their backs, walking out of the cool shadows of the synagogue and into the blinding sunlight of Capernaum. They leave the building. They leave the rabbi. They leave the movement entirely. They were perfectly willing to accept the miraculous bread. They were perfectly willing to watch the blind receive their sight. But the moment the teaching contradicted their cultural expectations, the trap sprang shut on their pride. They took the offense, and they walked away from the only source of eternal life. Jesus watches them go. He does not chase them down the street. He does not soften the theology to win them back or apologize for their discomfort. He simply turns to the 12 standing next to him and asks if they want to leave. 2. But the tragedy of Capernaum did not stay in the first-century dust. Jesus was not warning his closest friends about spiritual clumsiness. He was not telling them to watch their step because the road was bumpy. The mechanics of how a believer takes an offense and walks away follow a very specific, devastating pattern. The sound of sandals leaving Capernaum is not an ancient echo. It is a modern blueprint. The anatomy of a spiritual exit is devastatingly simple. It always starts with an expectation. You expect the church to feel like a sanctuary. You expect the answered prayer. You expect the mentor to be bulletproof. Then the expectation shatters. The rumor is whispered. The door is shut. The silence stretches into months. This is the moment the wood is carved. This is the moment the bait is laid. You feel the sharp sting of disappointment. That is a human reaction. But disappointment is not the skandalon. The skandalon is what you choose to do next. The offense asks for your attention. It demands a home in your mind. It offers you a comfortable seat in the courtroom of your own justification. You become the judge. You become the jury. You replay the tape of the betrayal in the dark. You feel the heat rising in your face again. You taste the metallic bitterness on your tongue. You are chewing on the bait. The enemy knows your specific appetite. If you crave validation, the bait is an insult. If you crave control, the bait is sudden chaos. If you crave justice, the bait is an unfair accusation. He was warning them about a highly engineered system, designed with brutal precision, to snap their allegiance in half. He was pointing out the bait. He places the meat precisely where you are most likely to step, and he waits in the brush. The moment you justify your bitterness, the mechanism snaps. You stop reading the text. You stop walking through the doors. You isolate. You harden. You retreat. The heavy stone drops. Your world shrinks down to the exact size of your grievance. The offense is not a protective wall. It is a suffocating cell. The enemy does not need to destroy your faith with a grand philosophical argument. He does not need a sophisticated theological debate. He only needs a poorly phrased text message. He only needs a forgotten invitation. He only needs a moment of human friction. Because the goal is not just to make you angry. The goal is to sever the connection. When a branch is cut from a tree, it does not turn brown immediately. It stays green for a little while. It looks healthy on the outside, but the sap has stopped flowing. The life source is entirely blocked. The decay is invisible, but it is absolute. This is the anatomy of a spiritual fatality. It happens every single day. It happens in the pews. It happens in the comment sections. It happens in the quiet, lonely spaces where we decide we are safer on our own. We step on the skandalon. When you realize what this word actually means, you suddenly understand why so many people who start the journey of faith and let the jaws close. convinced that we are the ones who are right. But the narrative does not have to end in isolation. There is a way to disarm the mechanism, and it requires looking at exactly what happens when the snare fails to close. A hunter carves a green branch in the ancient dirt, and a trap is laid for a hungry beast. A disciple pulls his rabbi aside, in the shadow of a pagan cliff, and holds out the bait of self-preservation. A letter arrives in the marble city of Corinth, and the cross becomes a snare for human pride. A crowd murmurs in a stone synagogue and walks away from the only source of eternal life. An expectation shatters in a modern room, and a grievance builds a suffocating cage. A sharp word is spoken in the dark, and a spiritual connection is quietly severed. The enemy waits in the brush with a perfectly justified offense, and a human soul steps blindly onto the trigger. Same mechanism, same bait. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The trap Peter set at Caesarea Philippi. The bait did not look like malice. It looked like love. It looked like a friend pulling a rabbi by the arm, his leather sandals scraping against the gravel, desperately trying to keep him safe from the cross. The most dangerous stumbling blocks do not come dressed as enemies. Do not finish it. You understand why offenses run so deep. Why bitterness takes root so quickly. In the dark. They come dressed as the things we feel we have every right to protect: our safety, our reputation, our perfectly justified anger. If you are in a season where you are holding on to a deep, searing offense, if you can taste the metallic bitterness on your tongue, and you know you are right, you have the receipts, you have the evidence, you have every right to want the heavy stone to fall on, the person who hurt you. The offense is not your shield, it is your snare. Jesus is pointing at the bait. The only way to disarm the mechanism is to stop chewing on the grievance. The only way to survive the Skandalon is to uncurl your fists and walk away from the wood. If this opens something in you today, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is carrying the weight of a bitter offense right now. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who refused to step on the trigger of self-preservation walk with you through your own betrayals and give you the courage to drop the bait before the stone falls. And why betrayal always feels like a surprise. The snare was laid perfectly. The question is not whether you will encounter it. The question is whether you will recognize the trigger before the stone falls. And the answer changes how you read every confrontation Jesus has. His fingers work a thin, curved piece of wood into the sand, wedging it carefully beneath the crushing weight of a heavy stone. From the shores of Galilee to the steps of the temple, to feel the jaws of this thing, you have to start with the wood itself. The wood was not a random branch kicked off a path. It was a specialized tool. In the ancient agrarian world, if a farmer wanted to protect his grain, or a hunter wanted to catch small game, he did not rely on chance. He relied on engineering. He would take a supple piece of green wood, strip the rough bark with a blade, and carve it down to a precise notch. This carved stick was the linchpin of the mechanism. It held the tension of a woven cord or propped up the crushing weight of a limestone slab. But the stick alone was useless. It needed a lure. The trapper would attach a piece of dried fig or salted meat directly to the wood. The scent would drift into the brush, pulling the animal out from the safety of the shadows. The creature approaches. It sniffs the meat. It feels no immediate danger because the stone above is perfectly still. The animal bites down, applying just enough pressure to the stick to dislodge the notch. The stick snaps. The stone falls. The genius of this trap is its reliance on the victim's own motion. The snare is not an instrument of brute force. It is an instrument of appetite. It requires the prey to participate in its own capture. He attaches a cord, weaving it through the dry grass so it cannot be seen. He places the bait directly on the wooden trigger. When ancient philosophers and poets needed a metaphor for moral and societal ruin, they did not look to invading armies or towering storms. They looked to the bait stick in the dirt, because they understood a fundamental reality about human nature. Ruin rarely begins with an outright attack. It begins with an invitation. We are brought down by the things we reach for. The trap requires a vulnerability, a hunger for safety, a desire for control, a need for vindication. The bait is carefully matched to the appetite of the target, and the ancient writers understood that the moment of capture is not the moment the stone falls. The moment of capture is the moment the jaw closes on the bait. In human terms, this is the anatomy of taking an offense. When you encounter an insult, a betrayal, or a thwarted expectation, you are being offered the bait. When you take the offense, when you chew on the bitterness, to rehearse the argument in your head and justify your anger, you are pulling the trigger. The stone falls on you, not the person who offended you. You think you are consuming a justified grievance, but the grievance is consuming you. But the most dangerous bait does not always look like vice or bitterness. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. The mechanism is delicate. One wrong breath, one slight shift in the wind, and the stone falls empty. And one afternoon, in the rocky, pagan territory of Caesarea Philippi, Jesus watches his most devoted friend step directly onto the trigger. Water rushes from the ancient cave of Pan. The cliff face looms over them. Pagan shrines stare down from the red rock of Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asks the question. The disciples offer rumors. Some say Elijah, some say a prophet. Then Peter speaks. He cuts through the noise. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It is the perfect answer. Jesus blesses him. He gives him a new name. He calls him the Rock. The moment is triumphant. The air hums with victory. Then the pivot comes. Jesus changes the subject. He does not speak of Roman overthrow. He does not speak of a throne in Jerusalem. He speaks of rejection. He speaks of the elders. He speaks of suffering. He speaks of his own execution. Peter freezes. This is not the script. This is not the plan. Peter steps forward. He grabs the rabbi by the arm. He pulls him away from the group. You can hear the leather of his sandals scraping against the gravel. His grip on Jesus is tight. His voice is a harsh, urgent whisper. Never. Lord, this shall never happen to you. Peter is speaking out of love. He is speaking out of loyalty. He is trying to protect his friend. Jesus turns sharply. The movement is sudden, but if he gets it right, the prey will step exactly where he wants them to. It is a simple mechanism. He does not smile. He does not thank Peter for his concern. He looks directly at the man he just called the Rock. Get behind me. Satan. Most people read this and flinch. They think Jesus is overreacting. They think Jesus is losing his temper with a well-meaning friend. But Jesus is not using hyperbole. He is identifying an assassination attempt. You are a stumbling block to me. Jesus says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. There is that phrase, the stumbling block. If you read it in English, it sounds like Peter is just in the way. It sounds like Jesus is walking down a road, and Peter is a clumsy boulder blocking the path. It sounds like a traffic jam. But Jesus is not describing a rock. He is describing a mechanism. Peter's rebuke is not an innocent misunderstanding. It is the bait. Peter is offering Jesus a crown without a cross. He is offering glory without the blood. He is holding out a piece of safety, hoping the Messiah will bite, hoping the Messiah will choose self-preservation over the mission. Peter is not a loose stone on the path. He is a drawn snare. Jesus sees the cord. He sees the tension. He sees the heavy slab hanging just above his head. And he refuses to step on the trigger. A stick. A trigger. A sudden collapse. The same mechanism used by the fowler, the hunter, the enemy of the soul. To understand exactly what Jesus saw in that moment, you have to strip away the English translation entirely. You have to look at the exact noun Matthew wrote down on the parchment, because it is not a word about walking. It is a word about capturing. Matthew, chapter 16, verse 23. Jesus stands face to face with a disciple who is desperately trying to convince him to avoid the cross. And he says, "You are a stumbling block to me." The word Matthew uses for stumbling block in the original text is the Greek noun skandalon. It appears 15 times in the New Testament, and it is the exact root from which we get the modern English word scandal. But in the first century Mediterranean world, it had absolutely nothing to do with public disgrace, gossip, or a ruined reputation. The skandalon was a highly specific piece of hunting equipment. It referred to the movable stick or the trigger of a trap, the exact piece of carved, tensioned wood where the hunter attached the bait. It is the delicate mechanism that springs the snare shut the moment it is touched. When ancient Greek scholars translated the older Hebrew texts, they used skandalon to describe the trigger of a fowler's net closing over a sparrow, or the hidden pitfall waiting for a beast beneath a pile of dry leaves. It is a device that requires the prey to participate. Most people read the English translations of the New Testament, and they come across a phrase that gets repeated again and again: the stumbling block. If something about uncovering these hidden mechanisms in the original language is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the bait is presented to the Messiah in the shadow of a pagan cliff. Peter is acting as the skandalon. He is offering Jesus the bait of self-preservation, completely unaware that he is holding the trigger for an ancient snare. And this root definition changes everything about how we read the New Testament warnings regarding offense, because the verb form, skandalizo, is almost always translated in English as to offend or to fall away. When Jesus says in Matthew 24 that in the last days many will be offended, he is not saying their feelings will be hurt. He is not saying they will be annoyed by a disagreement. He is saying they will take the bait. They will step on the skandalon, and the jaws of the trap will close around their ankles. An offense is not a random emotional wound. It is the bait on a spiritual snare. When someone wrongs you, the betrayal itself is not the trap. You see it in the Gospels. You see it in Paul's letters. You see it in the warnings of the early church. The trap is what you do next. The trap is the invitation to harbor bitterness, to rehearse the argument in the dark, and to nurse the grievance until it becomes your entire identity. The enemy does not need to destroy you directly. He only needs to offer you a perfectly carved piece of wood, wrapped in the scent of your own justified anger. Jesus recognized the skandalon when it was dressed in the loving concern of a friend. But there is another kind of trap waiting in the New Testament, and this one is not set by the enemy. This one is set by God himself. A man named Paul paces on a stone floor in Ephesus, dictating a letter to a city drowning in its own intellectual pride. Corinth is a metropolis of marble pillars, philosophical debates, and immense wealth. The believers there are obsessed with status. They want a religion that looks impressive. They want wisdom that makes them look smart. Paul stops pacing. He tells his scribe to write down a sentence that will horrify everyone who reads it. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. There is our word. Skandalon. Why is the crucifixion a skandalon? Why does Paul use the exact language of a hunter's snare to describe, and when most people read that phrase, they picture a loose rock on a Roman road. They imagine a clumsy accident, the execution of the Messiah, because the cross violates every single human appetite for glory. It is a trap set specifically for human pride. The religious elite wanted the sky to split open with fire. They got a sky turning black over a Roman execution site. They wanted a conquering king on a war horse. They got a carpenter with a nail driven through his wrist. They wanted a victory march. They got a death rattle. The cross offends the mind because it requires the death of the ego. If you want a God who simply validates your strength, the cross will offend you. If you want a savior who simply endorses your politics, the cross will offend you. If you want a faith that acts as an accessory to your upward mobility, the bleeding man on the timber will always be a skandalon. The Cross is not a stepping stone to your best life. It is a snare for your self-righteousness. It is a mechanism designed to snap. We shut on our arrogance, to strip us of our credentials, and to leave us with absolutely nothing but grace. You cannot boast while standing at the foot of a Roman instrument of torture. The trap is sprung. The pride is crushed. God uses the skandalon of weakness to capture the hearts of those who know they are broken. But what happens when the bait is rejected? What happens when a crowd encounters?